another superb day of action. Two Group 1s, Haley Moore alongside me. Haley will start off.
And actually, the chairman of that company was the person who wrote off to the original races that were started.
Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me.
So Rishi, thank you so much for joining me today. So you received all my questions. So as always in all of my interviews, I just want to start at the very beginning. Now, I read that your family bred and raced thoroughbreds. So I take it this is where it all began.
Yeah, that's right. My dad was obsessed with racing. So when I was about 3 years old, he actually established a stud farm in the Caribbean, in Trinidad. And he'd been over to the UK, and he'd bought a couple of horses, taken them back. He'd bought some horses locally, and he had a prize broodmare that he'd purchased, and he thought she would be like the foundation mare for the stud farm. And when I was 3 years old, she foaled a chestnut colt he was a son of the best stallion on the island, and he had a lovely white blaze, and I was obsessed with him. And he turned out to be quite a good racehorse in Trinidad. So I was hooked from 3 years of age, and I spent every weekend I could. Obviously, I was at school most of the time during the week, but on the weekends I would always be either on the gallops on a Saturday, and then on a Sunday I'd go to the stud farm and we'd all hang out, and my dad would always have me close at hand, and he was as obsessed as obviously I was. So it was something that he and I shared through to the end of his days, and I still keep going now. Yeah.
So you had horses and ponies then from a young age?
We had horses, we had ponies. I rode a little bit when I was younger. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, for me, it was an idyllic childhood growing up out there. Before I came over to the UK to go to school, as a kid, I'd spend those Sundays. They were just the best Sundays. And on a Saturday, there was racing. They only raced on a Saturday. Occasionally, they raced one or two other days midweek around big holidays. But then on a Sunday, we'd all go down to the farm, the stud farm. We'd spend time in the morning with the horses, doing all sorts of, either mucking out, riding, spending time with the yearlings or the foals or the weanlings or whatever. And then in the afternoon, my dad would send off to get some drinks and food, and we'd have a game of cricket on the farm with all the lads, and it was just brilliant. We had a great time growing up.
Did you have things like pony club or anything like that?
Not really. Not in Trinidad anyway. I mean, when I was growing up, maybe it is now. It's been a while since I've researched the pony club status of the Caribbean. But yeah, growing up, my brother and I had ponies, and we used to have to look after them. We only got to look after them on the weekend, in fairness, because we were at school. We weren't allowed to go to the farm during the week. But yeah, so I remember riding once. My dad had a racehorse who'd been injured, and she was called American Money, and she came to stay to rest at the farm until she got better, and she was ridden out the week before, and after she'd been ridden out by a jockey who'd come to sit on her, I sat on her and walked her back to the box and took off the tack and everything. And the following week, because I really liked her, and the following week I kept pestering my dad saying, "Oh, can I get on her, and can I give her a little spin and warm her up before the jockey gets on her this week?" And he was like, "No, just chill out, you're not, just relax and stop pestering me." So I just ignored him, went to the tack room, got the saddle and the bridle, put it on her, and walked her out into the paddock, started going round and round. She was fresh as you can imagine, having not really done much for a long time, and had a little spin a week ago, and she just bolted with me. I was 10 years old at the time, and she took off and was running down this pathway, and I didn't even say anything. I heard people shouting, but I was so frozen with fear. And then the next thing was that one of the lads came out and sort of put his arm around her, and she dodged left and I went right, and I was like, right, that's the last time I do anything without asking proper permission and making sure that it's done right.
Oh my goodness. Did you ever get on her again?
I didn't get on her again. No, I got back on a horse again, yeah, but I avoided her like the plague after that.
I'm not surprised. So I also read that you wanted to actually be a jockey. So then when you were
Yeah.
at school, did you think, right, this is what I'm going to do, and then you sort of went for it and give it a go?
I think wanting to be a jockey was pretty much in the same way that I wanted to be the number 3 batsman for the West Indies. It was just something that I'd mentioned, when I was growing up. Oh, I'd love to be a jockey, or I'd love to be the number 3 batsman for the West Indies. So cricket and horse racing when I was growing up in the Caribbean, obviously, two the big sports. Yeah, I wanted to do one or the other, but I was never ever going to be a jockey. I was awful at it, and when I was sitting on a horse, I think often my friends or the guys on the farm, they used to laugh at me saying that I looked a little bit like a. They used to say I can't remember, look like it was a. I think they said, I'm pretty certain I looked like a snail or some shelled insect, because I used to be hunched over a little bit like that, trying to make myself small. I wasn't a pretty sight on a racehorse. And in fact, I don't know whether you know, but I rode in the charity race at Cheltenham, and again, it wasn't a very pretty sight. I actually, my saddle slipped and I looked like a sack of potatoes coming up the Cheltenham. It's not. Riding was never going to be the thing for me, and in fact, nor was cricket either. As much as I loved those two sports, I wasn't very good at either one of them, riding or cricket. I was okay, but yeah, it was never going to be a thing, becoming a jockey. So I had to look for something else to do.
So despite that, then, did you sort of make it into a bit of a hobby?
Well, it was always a hobby. Racing was always my favourite sport growing up, and I remember when I came to school here when I was 12 years old, and I went to I went to prep school for one term, and then I went to boarding school in January. So I kind of started behind everybody else in my year, and they'd all made their friendship groups and stuff like that. So I was a little bit of a loner and left out of a lot of things, because I didn't really know anybody, and I'd come from a foreign country, and it was all very awkward. So I remember that I used to go to the local newsagents and buy all the racing stuff that I could find, newspapers and books, and just go back to my little dormitory and read every single thing I could. I mean, because racing was like a comfort blanket as well as a joy. And growing up in Trinidad, I'd obviously been obsessed with racing here. We used to get the Grand National, the Derby, the Guineas, the Ledger, the King George. We used to get them on television live in Trinidad. So when I was growing up, I remember, getting home or not going to school actually, when Troy won the Derby in 1979, and being at home watching the race, because it was such a big thing, especially for my family. Racing in the UK was just outstanding. It's the creme de la creme. So yeah, I had the bug very early on, and it's never left me.
Is the training much different in the Caribbean than it is like in the UK and Ireland?
No, I mean, it's so they had, when I was growing up, they had 3 race courses, one in San Fernando, one in Arima, and one in Port of Spain. And they're a bit Americanized, because they had all the stables there. They trained on the racetrack. There was a dirt track on the inside of all these race courses, and they would, exercise like they would, you see in America. Horses would just spin out and go round and round, and that's generally how they all trained. And all the horses were stabled at the track. Nobody had horses stabled at a base separate to the track. So it was all pretty intense. It's a small, obviously a small island, but with 3 race courses. So it was quite a big industry. And then it became centralized. So they did away with the 2 of the racetracks, and they kept one. They kept one in Arima, and they then converted, having raced only on turf or competed only on turf. They then created a dirt track, and started creating a program of dirt racing, which unsettled the industry somewhat.
And were there many race yards there? So was it quite a lot of competition, would you say, or?
Yeah. Growing up, there were loads of great yards, loads of great trainers, but all trained at the track. And the Eric Colt Durant was the top trainer in the Caribbean. He was dominant. He was like the Aidan O'Brien of Trinidad. In fact, of the Caribbean. I mean, he was probably the best trainer in the Caribbean ever.
So when you came to the UK, how did you get into the media? Because I know you said, you went to the newsagents and stuff, and I suppose that is where you kind of revised everything and got back into it. But then how did you get into the media?
So I worked for a PR company for about 4 years, and the original At the Races channel was starting up, and I was away at the time. And my boss at that PR company, unbeknown to me, had written a letter to the bosses of At the Races saying, when you're recruiting, it's probably going to be worth having a look at this guy. Just for something different, and he knows a bit about racing. And when I'd been away on holiday, and when I came back from holiday, I was told that I need to contact At the Races. Didn't know anything about what was going on. They said to me, "Oh, you're due to come in for a screen test." I went for the screen test. I went for it. It was the Friday before the Cheltenham Festival 2002, and on the Monday before Cheltenham started, I got a phone call from At the Races saying they were going to offer me a job, which I was shocked. I mean, I'm still shocked now, to be honest. I mean, why would they? I thought, but I've always been the kind of guy to kind of go with the flow more than have a focused target. So I went with the flow.
And then after At the Races, where did you go from then? So I suppose it all snowballed into, the next job.
Yeah, so I was at the races, and towards the end of my first year at the races, I did some stuff with the Beeb. With Channel 4, and then early in 2003, the Beeb came knocking on the door, and I joined the Beeb in 2003, and then it did snowball from there. I started working on other sports, got some great opportunities, did some amazing things, have done some amazing things, and still do amazing things. And it's, I sometimes have to pinch myself as to how lucky I have been. The truth is that there are loads of people that could have had this opportunity, loads of people that could do it. And I was just very lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
So what's been your favourite event you've covered from your career so far?
So many. I've got it. I mean, I almost feel embarrassed saying it because there've been so many amazing events. I've been to 4 Olympic Games, been to 2 Paralympic Games as well. Been working at Wimbledon since 2004. The Masters Golf, I absolutely love that event. Ryder Cups. The first Ryder Cup I worked on was the one at Medina in 2012, where Europe came back from an almost impossible position, which is why it's now called the Miracle at Medina. But also, obviously, in racing, I've covered the Breeders' Cup, covered racing in Hong Kong, the Dubai World Cup. It's very difficult to say one above the other. I guess when you think about being a sports fan is what I am. I mean, I'm a racing fan, a sports fan, and being in privileged positions, being able to say, I'm standing here talking to a Tiger Woods or a Roger Federer, and I'm just literally a sports fan in a very privileged position. I just continue to genuinely pinch myself all the time because I'm like, how lucky am I to be doing this? Because a lot of people would also love to be in that position. But the Olympics, maybe. London 2012 was amazing. It really was amazing. The country coming together, doing well, and people just were nice to each other as well. People seemed to actually like each other for a couple of weeks anyway.
And everyone said hello to each other on the tube and stuff.
Yeah, I remember being on the train going into work, and we just won our first medal, and the train driver announced that we just won our first medal, and everybody on the train cheered. I was like, this is unusual but enjoyable.
Yeah, a great atmosphere. So have you ever been put on an event, maybe in your early days in your career that you didn't know much about? So I don't know, a particular sport that you had to really revise and think, oh my goodness, I need to know what I'm talking about.
That happened. I did. I remember. I loved snooker, for example, growing up. But I never, because you have to spread yourself too thinly. So I would watch a lot of it, but I never read up about it or researched as much as I did other sports. And I remember the first time I worked on a snooker event, I did have to work on it, and it's I quite enjoy doing that for a lot of the sports that I would cover that wouldn't be ones that I was particularly immersed in growing up. So yeah, that I've worked on the World Bowls Championship for years. I remember the first event, I had to learn about all these players that I didn't know about. I've done things like basketball, where I again had to learn a lot about it. But it's you learn how to learn and how to put information in. And very often you hear commentators talk about every race they have to commentate on. Obviously, it's fresh for them, and they have to put that information in, and then they have to flush it out and put more in. So it sung some sort of similarity to me, the fact that you sometimes have to put information in and then take it out, because my brain is only that big and it can't take too much.
And you have a world of sports knowledge all packed into a tiny space.
Well, I think a lot of it disappears, if I'm honest. Some of it stays, but a lot disappears. And the older I get, more and more disappears.
So in your career moving on, is there anything that you would like to cover that you may not have covered, or something that you would really like to cover again?
I think I'd love to cover the Melbourne Cup. I've never done that, and it does seem to be an amazing occasion, having watched it for such a long time. And anything with great history, and the Melbourne, in something that I enjoy, and the Melbourne Cup obviously has an amazing history, and I'd love to be able one day to cover that. But I think I said to you earlier on that I kind of go with the flow, try not to have too many targets. Sometimes leads to disappointments. That's probably why I am the way I am. But I think if I see something like the Melbourne Cup, I think I'd love to do it. I don't, I'm not desperate that if I don't do it, it's going to be something that I'll pine for. But yeah, I'd love to visit there. I've always wanted to combine that with being a cricket fan. I've always wanted to go to the Melbourne Cup, stay on and watch a test match on the MCG on Boxing Day. I've always wanted to do that between Australia and the West Indies, but unfortunately the West Indies are not very good at test cricket at the moment. So I'm not sure when that will ever happen. But ideally that would be like one of my bucket list trips.
So have you got a favourite trainer? And if you do, who is it and why?
Well, obviously, try to be neutral in the media. But being from the Caribbean, and I think people probably realise it anyway, but I've always had a soft spot for now Sir Michael Stoute, because of course growing up in Trinidad and being born in the Caribbean and growing up there, the idea of another West Indian person succeeding to the level that he did in a sport that I loved was extremely enchanting, and he obviously associated with so many great horses. Sugar, when I was obviously still 8 years old, being the first one that really sort of smacks you in the face. Wow, who is that horse? It's Pegasus. It's something that's magical and mystical, ridden by teenage Walter Swinburne. So I've always been a huge Sir Michael Stoute fan over the years, and he's still operating at a very high level.
Do you prefer national hunt or flat racing?
Good question. Grew up with flat racing in the Caribbean, but because we also got things like the Grand National and occasionally the Cheltenham Festival will be broadcast as well. So I was always appreciative of those races. The good thing about the job that I do is that, you asked about, for example, what's your favourite sport? And I'm very lucky to operate the sports that I cover. You're covering some of the best of it. And that's the thing about the racing that I cover. It's some of the best national hunt and flat. You get to cover a whole spectrum of it. But I really enjoy, I know it sounds a cop-out, but I really enjoy both of them because we get to cover so many good events in both national hunt and flat racing. I think the great thing for me is finding joy in the ones that perhaps people don't, the days that are the hardest. You go to a normal midweek meeting somewhere, there's always some interest. There's always some interest somewhere along the line. Whether it's national hunt or flat, I don't think it makes any more difference to me. Because I can find, I love those days when you go to Newmarket and there's a load of 2-year-old races and who's going to be a standout winner. And I love when you go to a national hunt meeting, wherever it may be, and you got a novice hurdle or a beginner's chase or something, and you just think, wow, you could potentially see something very exciting here. So you just never know. I remember when I went to Nottingham one day at the end of the flat season a few years ago. I was working with Steve Mellish, and we went along watching. It was at the end of the year. It's soft ground. You're not really expecting a lot, but there were 2-year-old races, and the first 2 horses home in the opening race were Golden Horn and Storm the Stars. Storm the Stars obviously went on to do quite good things, but Golden Horn became one of the best racehorses we'd ever seen. I was there for his first run, so you just never know what you're going to get, and that's what makes it exciting for me, whether it's national hunt or flat.
And then it's always different. Now, I know you have to stay in the middle, but is there anything that sparked your interest horse-wise this season coming up?
Horses to follow for the season coming up. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of horses I'm really interested in. And again, looking at sort of novices, he's a bit more of an exposed horse, but Dava Star, who was 3rd in the Champion Hurdle last year, he's gone over fences. He's won his first race over fences. I think he's going to be pretty good over fences as well. I thought he was an interesting horse for the Arkle. So I like him. Gavin Cromwell, his trainer, tremendous trainer. Obviously his record is getting better and better at the festival as well. And I quite like a horse called the Big Breakaway. I'm a huge fan of his trainer, Colin Tizard. One of his other horses, Lost in Translation, would be probably my favourite national hunt horse at the moment. But the Big Breakaway, he is one of the most handsome horses you could possibly wish to see. He obviously cost a lot of money. He's very talented. I think he won all his races over hurdles last season, bar the one when he was 4th at the festival. I think he's the first British trained horse home that day in Envoy Allen's race. And I think over fences, he's a point-to-point winner. I think over fences he could potentially be a star. And Colin Tizard, of course, trains Lost in Translation, and the likes of Q Card said this might be the best ever. So that's pretty big hype for him.
Fantastic. Well, that is all my questions. That's it. That's
my
all.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Have a
All
good
right.
day.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away.